think so, Mr. Lee.
Hello.
I don't know, but it looks really dark right here. Hi, guys. Welcome to the Community Homeworks Workshop this evening. We're so glad that you're joining us. My name is Tiana Harrison, and I am the Education and Volunteer Coordinator at Community Homeworks. If you're watching this live, please feel free to comment and let us know where you're tuning in from. Also, if you would like to join in on the discussion and ask questions, please put that in the comment section as well. If you're joining us after the live broadcast, we still are happy to answer your questions. It just may take us a little longer to respond. Community Homeworks is a nonprofit organization with a mission to empower homeowners to maintain safe, sustainable, and dignified homes. We get our funding from grants, gifts, and donations. So if you find value in this workshop tonight, we encourage you to donate on our website at communityhomeworks.org. Tonight's workshop is titled Fence Repair. And of course, our instructor is none other than the magnificent Mr. Lee Taylor. So, Mr. Taylor, we're so happy that you're here tonight, and we look forward to learning more about fence repair.
All right. So, yeah, like Deanna said, if anybody has questions, please ask. It's good to have people here in the audience. So, it is about fence repair, but I also want to touch on some of the details as far as installing some of the fences and whatnot. So, I want to start off with, does anybody anybody here have questions about fence or problems with an existing fence or anything like that? You do? Okay. Okay. Your gates. Are they wood? You're talking about wood privacy fence? Chain link. Okay. Both. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, they were talking about chain link gates not closing properly and whatnot. So, yeah, we can get into that also. So, how wide are they, out of curiosity? It's two of them, and they open so a car can get through and stuff. Okay. Yours is just a.
Okay. So I'm going to repeat that for the participants that are watching online. We have one participant that has a 6-foot double entry fence and another participant that has a fence that's about 4 or 5 feet wide.
All right. So what we're going to be talking about is different types of fencing for different types of applications. We'll talk about the parts and pieces and their functions. We'll talk about the methods for making those fence or gate repairs. We'll talk about the tools that you're going to need. Related workshops: spring, summer maintenance, fall, winter maintenance, hand tools, power tools, landscaping, and probably a few more. But I do want to break this down. I basically say there's kind of two styles of fence out there as far as residential. You have your chain link, and that's, this right here. This is an actual coated chain link fence. Has a vinyl coating on it. You can get that with different colors and whatnot. Most of the time, they're just silver. And then, and different heights. That's 4 foot. You can get a 6 foot high. And then there's also the privacy fences or wood fences. And pickets and whatnot kind of fall into that category also as far as the wood fencing goes. And there are pros and cons to both. One of the things is if you're planning on installing a fence, one of the things you want to think about is what's the purpose of that fence? Is it just to keep, your dog in, or, keep your kids from running around, or is it more of a decorative thing? So, I mean, this kind of helps us with, deciding as far as what fence to put in. A lot of people like the privacy fences because it offers privacy. Chain link, you can get a couple of different things, actually. Oh, I hit the TV. You can get what it looks like a tarp of all things, and it attaches to it to give privacy to this. And like I said, whether it's 4 foot or 6 foot, that doesn't matter. You can also get these. They're usually made out of vinyl, and you can weave them in between, and that creates some privacy also. So, there are ways you can make a chain link, not so transparent in a sense. The other thing you usually want to kind of keep in mind when you're thinking about what kind of fence you're going to be putting in is what's going on with the area that you're going to be putting it in. So what I mean by that is a lot of times people are taking down an old dilapidated fence, and it may not have been taken care of over the years as far as like trees and whatnot growing either right on that line or real close to it. And what I'm getting at with that is the roots, actually. And it can be maddening when you're working on, well, there's a picture, if you're working on this and, let's say you're laying out a privacy fence and you're laying out your 4x4 posts and you hit a giant tree root and you have to either get through that or be able to shift that. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more as far as some other details on that versus like a chain link fence that what it does is you have what are called terminal posts. Those are the posts that are on the very ends, and those are set in, a couple of 2 or 3 bags of concrete, and then they get set up, and then the fence is stretched. And then depending on the length will depend on how many of your intermediate posts that you drive in. And they can be shifted a little bit left or right. That doesn't really matter much. So a lot of times the chain link is actually easier to install. But some people don't like the way it looks. So there's a lot of those little details to kind of think about. Chain link a lot of times seems cheaper. And I'm going to stop on that. Do you have a question? Huh? Yeah, well, so yes and no. I mean, if you were to look at, she asked, is it cheaper to buy go chain link versus privacy fence? If you look at it, usually where they get you is the parts and pieces needed, because a lot of people just look at the rolls of the chain link, whether it's 4 foot or 6 foot, and they go, oh my gosh, 150 foot roll is, this much. That's a lot less than, say, a couple sections of privacy fence, because, sections of privacy fence like this could be $40 and up, for an 8 foot section. But with chain link, you have to think about, you have top rail, you have other parts and pieces that you need to you need to incorporate into that. So you can't just look at just the chain link itself. You know, I said they get you with the nuts, the bolts, and all the pieces and parts that you need to do to be able to put it together. So, you know, in the end, they're relatively close in a lot of ways. Sometimes you have to look at how easy is it going to be to install versus, you know, so I mean, if you look at that sort of stuff, I'd say overall chain link can be a little bit less expensive, but especially with wood prices going up. But, you know, nothing beats a privacy fence, in my opinion. So, anyways, that's one of those things you can price out. A lot of the box stores have it to where you can go, they have a computer there, and you can say, all right, you know, I have, you know, 150 feet here and 20 feet here, and it will sit there and calculate everything out with all the parts and pieces and be able to tell you exactly roughly how much that is going to be. So that's nice. So, but, you know, like I said, just don't look at the actual rolls of chain link. The thing with the privacy fences, as far as the finished privacy fences, what I mean by that is, you know, they're 6 foot tall, 8 foot wide, and you have a lot of variety. You know, I mean, whether they're the dog-eared style, say like this, these are just pickets, but a dog-eared style like that, or decorative style. You know, there's a lot of variety there, but there are some issues with those pre-made fences that I have, and one of them is generally the pieces that make up the frame of it are not even necessarily dimensional lumber. What I mean by dimensional is 2x4 is 3.5 by 1.5 inches, you know, and the smaller the lumber, the more apt it is to be able to break apart and whatnot. And then how they're put together, a lot of times they're just stapled or something along that line, and they can have a tendency to wear out. And if you buy a good quality one, you're going to pay for it. The other issue I have with this style of buying the sections is when you're laying out the posts, you have to be dead on, because the reason is what's going to happen. Do I have to move this? Can you guys see this? If I move these over, is when you're laying out those posts, you have an end here that only half of this lays on that 4x4 post, right? You got your 4x4 post, and you got half of it that's on there, and then that other section has to be able to butt up right up to it. So you're down to inches that you have to be right there. And if you're not, you can cut the fence. It's kind of a pain. You can't stretch it. So it's one of those things where, you know, if you're in this phase right here and you hit something, it's a nightmare, because you're just fighting and fighting and fighting and having to dig it out and everything else. So what I like to do if I'm putting a privacy fence up is I use 4x4 posts. That's what this is, a 4x4 post right here. They come in. Oh, this one's been outside for a minute. These come in, you know, 3.5 by 8 foot, and generally a couple foot into the ground. But what I'll do is I'll stretch a line. That's what this guy is. So we'll kind of set it up to where, okay, yep, the fence is going to be right along this area. And, you know, we stretch a line out. And then that gives me a straight line by that taunt line there to be able to start digging the holes. And when you're digging the holes, you can use augers. I think there's a picture of there with augers and whatnot. So they have tools that you can rent at the teeny one. That's fine. They have tools that you can rent that it's like a 4-inch auger. And what it does is it just digs a hole for the post, and you can go ahead and mark out where you're going to be putting those those holes for the concrete and the stone and stuff like that. When he gets to it, I'll point it out. Nope. But that's going to be one of those pictures we need. Nope. I thought we got a picture of one in there. Well, anyways, we'll keep looking for it. But yeah, the auger is a lot of times it's a 2-person auger, and my wife can attest to it. They're not that bad necessarily. It will burn holes in your shirt. Yeah. So, anyways, but what we do is we'll lay it out. We have our line, and then we place. I get like ground spray paint, and we measure out. So, what I do when I build these is I make it so that I could buy dimensional lumber, 2x4s, treated 2x4s, and I'll buy 8-foot long or 10-foot long. It just kind of depends. And what I'll do is once we get the posts figured out where they're going to go, I can make it so that when I lay that 2x4 on, I pull it all the way to here, and then the next one goes underneath. So I have a lot more bearing on there, and it's going to hold up a lot longer. And you can kind of see that here where they're staggered. And it doesn't really matter. A center one's going to go up later. But it makes it so that if you hit something, you can shift that post one way or the other. And then all you're doing is just changing from a 2x4x8 to maybe a 2x4x10 or a little shorter, and just cutting them down to what you need. So, and you can see there, we were staining it as we were going. It's a big blank screen. So, there it is. So, yeah, we're trying to get this off the phone. So, but, you can see the posts and stuff and those cross sections. And then what we do is we'll just buy the actual pickets themselves and then nail them up or screw them up or something along that line. To me, for a privacy fence, that works out a lot easier. It really it goes pretty quick. I mean, once you get a rhythm going, it's not necessarily that hard, and it's held on by screws, by your deck screws or something along that line.
What's meant by pretty quick?
Say that again.
What is meant by pretty quick? 4 hours, 7 hours?
Oh, pretty quick. Depends on how much fencing you're putting in. There's multiple things you got to think about. Soil type, as far as how long it's going to take. I've had some where the soil is really hard and it takes all day just to dig 20 holes or something like that, even with the auger, So it just depends. But like I said, it's not one of those things that it takes forever to do. And you have to have your concrete set up and stuff like that too. So, I mean, it goes in steps. But like I said, the first step is getting that figured out where you want, get a nice straight line. And this is the same for chain link. It doesn't really matter. So, but I'm drifting. So I want to talk about repairs. So, like I said, putting these up, or if you're going to be putting them up, you want to think about those other issues. If you already have, say, a chain link or a privacy fence, you can repair them. They usually are the issue. Sometimes with gates, so let me pull this guy out again. So a lot of times with gates, what happens is, especially if they're real wide gates, they have a tendency to sag. All right. And then it's dragging on the bottom or something along that line. You have to kind of like and wrestle it up and stuff. They do sell, they're almost like wires, like a tension wire. And what it does is you put it from corner to corner and you tighten it up. And what it does is it pulls that it pulls this up, so it keeps this gate from sagging like that. So as you tighten that wire, it's a tension wire, it'll pull that gate up and keep it from sagging over time. And the wider the gate, the more apt you're going to need that. And if you go to one of the box stores, you can find those pretty easily. As far as those things, if the fence gets, or if the gate gets bent, this is where it gets a little bit tricky. Sometimes if it's bent too bad, you may just have to go out and get a new one. Are you saying, because you were saying yours is bent, right? Is the frame itself bent? This part bent, or you're talking the chain link is bent? The frame. Mm-hmm. Push it, yeah.
And I think we hit the snowblower with it because it was bent like somebody hit it.
Yeah. I mean, and like I said, there's different styles too. I mean, as far as how the gate is held together, this one's actually welded, so you buy this like a pre-sized gate. But there are others where you can it's almost like you get a kit and you make it, so you cut the tubes and all that sort of stuff, but most of the time they're this yeah, this is a closer. Yeah, not a closer. Yeah, it's almost the length of the fence. Yep. And it's got a drop that it drops into the ground. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, and that can drive you nuts. Do you have something solid for it to drop into, or does it drop into that rod that drops down? Does that drop into just in the dirt? Oh, okay. Okay. For me to lift it and do it, and I was trying to close it, I actually end up breaking one of the brackets that hold it together. So then that was another thing. Yep. Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing. The wider the gate, the more problems it's going to have over time. Like I said, and part of the maintenance on that, like I said, is that tension wire that will keep that from sagging. Like I said, the wider the gate, the more it's going to want to sag. I have seen it sometimes where you can buy a wheel that goes on and it gets attached so that it's resting on that and runs, on that wheel. There are ones that actually slide, but if you don't have the room, that doesn't work. So a lot of people go to the swing gate style. So, yeah. Yeah. Yep. Part of the with that one, I mean, that's one of those things I'd have to see it. Sometimes you can fix them, but sometimes you just have to get. Right. Yeah. Yeah, you may not be able to. You may have to replace it. Because like I said, once these rails start getting bent up, especially is it like a welded, like a big one piece? Yeah. So it's yeah. Right. They swing like this. Yeah. You can get a good good fence company to come out and take a look at it, but oh yeah. 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 So yeah, it's one of those things that and wood fences are the same way. As far as making a gate that's not going to want to sag or fall apart over time.
I just have a random question. In a
Yep.
situation like that, how does she go after the person that provided the service? Like, would it be their responsibility? Oh, I'm sorry. Lesson learned.
It wasn't a company then.
No, no, no. Yeah.
Right.
It was just incompetency. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. What you can do, like I said, you might be able to bend it back into shape enough to make it close. You might look and see if that is a wheel or something like that will work. And is yours on asphalt also, or okay? Yep. Yeah, yeah. All right. So, all right. So, see this part right here? So there's probably another post that's sitting right here. All right. So she asked how to get this gate off. No luck. Hold up. Okay. So you generally have a what's called a terminal post right here, and that has a piece on it similar to this, a little rod that sits up underneath like this. Right. So, and then usually, sometimes these pieces are tightened down to a point where it's not necessarily going to be able to pop it off. So sometimes what you have to do is loosen these up just a little bit, whether it's 2 or 3. Usually there's only 2. So it's 4 foot high. Yeah. Loosen them up a little bit, and then you'll be able to grab that gate and generally lift it off. So I think very rarely do they have an actual nut on the bottom, but again, manufacturers are a little bit different. But a lot of times that's how it's sitting. It's just some kind of a piece that's sitting into these. And you said you have to repair, or you just have to replace the whole thing. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, yeah, and usually when you buy like a gate kit, it's going to come with the gate itself, and then a lot of times they'll have all the hardware and everything else that you're going to need. And I would say if you're doing that, go ahead and replace the hardware, whether it's the hangers or anything along that line. But ask about that tension wire, and that will help that from sagging. Like I said, if you want to put a wheel on it or something like that, you can get those little accessories that will make life a little bit easier down the road. So you guys have a picture of the auger right here. This is a 2-person auger as far as digging those holes and stuff, and you can use this for chain link also. So with general repairs, and I don't care if it's a wood fence or it's a chain link fence, usually the biggest culprit is trees growing. And I'm sure you've all seen the trees that are growing. They actually grow up and through, and they grow around all the metal and everything else. And it will tear up a wood fence. It'll tear up a chain link fence. So part of what I say is this time of year when they start coming up, they're about that tall, pull them out or kill them or whatever you need to do. Usually I say keep those trees as a good 1.5 feet away from any fence that you have, because it will quickly tear into it. So keeping the trees off as much as you can. And then if you have a chain link, part of the quick maintenance is checking to see if the chain link itself is attached, and you can see there's these little wires, and they'll sell these in packs. It takes a pair of pliers or something like that, but that's actually what keeps that chain link to your top rail and all that sort of stuff. So I'll go through and I'll make sure there's a lot of slack right there, so you may want to grab another one and hook it around. Also, what I'll do is go through and make sure you have these tension bars here. This is what they use to be able to stretch that fencing. And we'll get into that here in a second. But I make sure these are peened over, that they're not missing. You have nuts and bolts all over the place. So, you can take a socket set and just make sure they're snugged up and whatnot. So you said chain link's not necessarily that difficult to take care of. And it's not like you're having to do that every year. A lot of it's just a visual check. The gates are a whole other beast, but another thing that happens a lot of times with chain link is, so you have your terminal posts, those get set in concrete and they get all dried and everything else. And then what happens is that you'll get your chain link, you'll roll it out, and you'll get a stretcher, and that's page 2. That's what this is. And you have a tension bar, and you hook that stretcher onto this bar. You weave it down through the chain link itself, and then you can do it a lot of different ways. Some people, there's a tree, and they'll have what's called a come along. They'll wrap it around the tree, and that tensions that chain link, so it's not waving all over the place. I've seen people where they back up their truck to it and hook it onto the bumper or hook it onto the hitch or whatever. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. You stretch it out, and then you attach your fence to the terminal posts, and that's usually, this is just kind of a bent over piece. The ones I'm used to, it's more like a piece like this that comes around, and it's a nut and bolt that actually holds that. And then you work on the intermediate posts as far as driving those in. And those intermediate posts, however many are in between those two end posts, the terminal posts, like I said, is dictated by how long that fence is. And those are driven in. I don't know if you have a picture of that or not. Don't see it. Yeah, there's not a picture of it, but you can rent on page 4. You can rent. It's a driver. So what it is just usually a dual handle cylinder that goes over those posts. You kind of lay them out, you stand them up, and it just drives those posts right into the ground. And like I said, they don't need cement or anything else like that. Get them down to where you want to be. And then a lot of times what happens is when you're driving that post in, it will kind of mushroom the head a little bit. So I usually let them sit a little high. So I have my end posts are set at a certain height. And then what I'll do is I'll stretch a line again to kind of give me an area to be able to cut it off, and I'll cut those tubes with a hacksaw or a tube cutter or something along that line. Because then what happens a lot of times is you put a cap on, and that's what holds your top rail. And these top rails are, they fit together, and you run that whole top rail, and then if you say this is an intermediate post, that cap has a little top piece that goes through it. It just helps keep everything together. Like I said, it's a lot of little parts and pieces, and you can see, this number 1 here is the line post cap. Fence ties. So, like I said, putting those together, not necessarily that difficult. You just kind of go through the steps of it. Usually what happens is people don't put in all the parts and pieces that they need. One of the things is don't skimp on these ties that tie the chain link to the body itself or to the frame, because again, you're going to get a dog or something like that that'll bend it over. Like I said, these little ties are pretty cheap, so you can make sure that's tied up pretty good. a lot of times too, sometimes you will get a bottom tensioner, and it's basically a long wire that's tensioned along the bottom to keep that bottom from wanting to kick out, like a dog pushing on it or something like that. I think it's on here. Yeah, tension wire. Yep, that's the one that's run along the bottom. There's the auger.
Lori just sent me the picture of the auger.
Oh, yep. So that's the auger. That's just, I mean, technically one person can do it. You can kick occasionally, but yeah. Oh, that's our daughter's son-in-law. That's our son-in-law, not me. So, but yeah, when you're setting posts or you're setting terminal posts or anything along that line, one of the things you want to do is you dig your hole. I don't care if it's for a 4x4 post or it's for your terminal post for your chain link. Well, you want to dig your hole big enough to where, let's see if this does it. So you have, let's say you have, this is your 4x4, right? Hole. And you're going to dig out whatever depth it needs. And he said it's usually a couple 2 to 3 feet into the ground. But what I like to do is if you use something, oh, there it is. There's the driver, the post driver. That's for the chain link. But anytime I drill a hole into the ground, what I'm going to do is flare the bottom out a little bit. Just like that. And you can do that once you auger it out, you can just get a shovel in there and just kind of mushroom out that bottom. And what I like to do, and this is more so for wood posts, is I'll put 6 or so inches, you have to take that into account, of pea gravel or something. You can have that delivered in bulk or you can do it in bags, kind of up to you. But what that does is it gives drainage. And then your post sits right on top of that gravel. And then your concrete sits all the way around it. So, but a lot of people don't think about that gravel on the bottom. What that does is it offers that drainage. And in some areas, you really need that. Because what can happen even with a treated, you have to use treated wood, 4x4, is that they can rot out, especially if they're in high moisture areas. And a lot of times what happens is right in this area right here at ground level, they just snap. So you want, usually it depends on, usually for a 4x4 post like this, if I'm doing a standard privacy fence, usually 2 60-pound bags per hole ish. It sort of depends on how it's orientated. So let's say you're running a privacy fence that's running north-south. So you have that west wind that always is bailing up against that thing. There you may want to have a little more concrete in there to be able to help keep that from wanting to push over. I put up a fence real quick at home and I didn't use anything, and now it leans like this. But I don't care. So, but yeah, having a little bit of gravel, flaring that out, not dropping these, don't say, is one of those things that makes life a lot easier. This thing's going to drive me nuts. It's just going to fall. I'm going to let it fall. Anyways, let's see what else. Yeah. As far as setting your posts and setting whether they're wood post or chain link, there might be a picture in there where we have some cross braces, possibly. Yeah. So this is where what you want to do is you're going to have your posts, right? And you have your gravel in there and you have your concrete. You can rent one of those mixers or whatever. And you're going to put your post in and you're going to have your level. And I've said this before in other classes, that get as long level as you can, that will plumb it up. And what you're going to do is you're going to have a 2x4 screwed in going this way and a 2x4 screwed in on, say, this side heading this way. So it's going to deal with this and it's going to deal with this. And you get it in and you plumb it. There you go. Yep. Those are huge 6x6 by, I don't even know, 16 or something like that. But what you're going to do is one person's going to be doing this. You have that one screw in there so that it can move down to a stake. And the person goes, yep, go ahead and screw it. The stake's driven into the ground. They screw it, one screw in, and then they do the same thing on the other side. You put your level on that side, and then you do this way. And then you let them dry. And it looks like that. And sometimes you may need that. We did that because that was such a big, tall post. But that will set them. And you really want to make sure that they're nice and plumb when you're doing that. The other thing is, too, is remember how I said we stretch a line to be able to get our fences and doing one of these sort of things. What we'll do is usually I'll do this like on the two end posts and then stretch a line between those so that when we're setting those posts in the middle, I can stand it up and touch that line. Does that make sense? So it just makes it so it's a little bit easier to be able to get that nice straight. But yeah, usually something like that, you're going to put that concrete in, and that it has to set for a couple of days usually. But there's other stuff you can be working on also. So, getting the structure, the posts and everything else is usually the bulk of the work. Like I said, then we put in our 2x4s. Like I said, I overlap them. Usually throw in, three or so screws per deck screws per end, and then the slats get attached. They're gonna fall, and you can buy these in, a big old bunk of them, and get them delivered. As far as attaching these, you can put them on with nails. You can put them on with screws. It just kind of depends on what you're doing. Did we use nails? We did. We found some shorter nails that were galvanized, and they'd work with the treated lumber. Galvanized, it means so. Okay. See, so the question was, what is galvanized? Yeah. And that's one of those things I don't think about anymore. So if you're going into treated lumber, so pressure treated lumber, meaning it's less likely to rot and whatnot, what you use outside, it has the galvanized is a coating that's put on the nails or screws, and you probably have some floating around. A lot of times with nails, it's called hot dip galvanized, and it looks like a gray coating that's over it. With screws, it doesn't necessarily have that, but they'll say rated for treated lumber, because if you were to put just standard nails or screws in, they'll disintegrate within a year. And I've seen it where somebody has worked on a big project like that, and they didn't use galvanized stuff, and all of a sudden their fence is going. So yeah, anytime you're going into treated lumber, you want hot dip galvanized in the nails or screws that are rated for the treated lumber. Yeah, the chemicals are used because all they do, this is just standard lumber, and all they do to treat this is they'll load them up on, they look like rail cars, and they have spaces. They'll stack them up, and they have space in between, and they'll roll this car filled up with lumber into a big vat, close the door, fill it up with chemicals you don't really want to think about, and put it under pressure for a certain amount of time. And that pressure pushes that chemical into that wood. It makes so it doesn't rot. On that note, there are grades. So there is treated lumber out there that is, they say, rated for ground contact and stuff. You're going to pay a little more, but basically what it is that if you cut this, let's say you cut an end, you'll see that it's usually a green kind of color, that it's usually moves in about half an inch or so in. The ones that are rated for a little more contact to the ground, basically they're just in that tank longer. It pushes that chemical deeper into the wood. Thank you. I'll pass these around. So you can see there's a gray coating on that. But you can buy a different grade of pressure treated lumber. So, you can use the stuff you buy off the shelf, or you can buy that extra treated. Technically, if you were to cut treated lumber, so like these horizontal pieces, a lot of times, doing this method, you end up having to cut them. So they sell a product out there, and I didn't do this on Sammy's. I probably should have. Where it comes in it's almost like a paint. So when you cut treated lumber, you paint the ends, and it basically is that stuff, and it just treats those cut ends. So, but it makes that fence last a lot longer. Like I said, the full bearing onto that 4x4 post, it makes it so that thing's going to sit there for quite a long time. So, but yeah, like I said, one thing I would talk about, or I'd say, as far as the screws, is they'll say they're rated for treated lumber. Be careful if you have some old screws laying around. And then this was, I don't know how long ago it was. They changed the chemicals that go into these treated lumber. And the old screws, and I think this was 15 years ago or 20 years ago, the old safe for pressure treated lumber doesn't work anymore because they changed the stuff. So I put that one out there because some people are like, well, yeah, I got a jar full of, screws that are safe for, treated lumber. Be careful when you're getting into that. So usually you want to buy them. But yeah, I mean, when you're putting that up, it's, like I said, it's relatively straightforward. It's one of those things you learn more as you're working on it. As far as the chain link goes, generally, like I said, that's usually a little easier. It's usually a little faster. The main reason for that is you're not having to use as much concrete. This is the only concrete you're really using is terminal posts at the ends of the long runs or posts on either side of the gates. So, a lot of times those can be set, and you can spend a day setting your, 4 or 6 or 8 posts, let them dry, and then go ahead and do everything in between. Yeah. Yep. Yep. If you have a gate, yep, just straight line. Yep. Just driven in. Yep. Yep. Yeah. So the question was, if you have just a long line for a chain link fence, you have 2 terminal posts that are in concrete. And yeah, that's the case. And then the rest, those intermediate posts, are driven in by that post driver that we were talking about before. And you can do the same thing where, once I get those terminal posts into the ground. You really want, when you're backfilling the concrete, you got to be careful because we talked about that stretcher. And I had one where when I was doing my backyard, it was probably about, 80 feet wide or 60 feet wide or so. And I stretched that thing, and that terminal post on the end went, it didn't bend, but it moved. So we're going to have to push it back and make sure all the dirt was packed around it and everything else. So you have to kind of watch out for that sort of stuff. But, if you have those two done, you can stretch that line again and, drive those posts in. So you're right in, right in line with that. Instead, because that stretched line is going to give you pretty dead straight as far as not having this. So, and I will say this is called Mason's line. You'll find this at most of the stores, usually in the area where they sell these, where they sell the chain link and stuff. It's been a long day. Don't laugh at me. Buy the brightly colored ones, and they sell them in pink or neon orange or whatever. After you string yourself a couple of times, because you don't see it, believe me, it's not fun. But get one that you can see, because you're moving around and everything else, and you're tripping on it, and you're having to either reset it or so get the brightly colored ones. Oh yeah, you did that one. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, as far as the durability of it and stuff, wood can be just as durable. The main thing with the wood is that stain them, get a good quality stain that's meant for fencing. You can see with that we stain the posts and we stain the 2x4s and all that stuff a little bit ahead of time, and it made it so that they're gonna last. So, and you want to make sure that I guess don't chintz out on the don't chintz out on the stain is what I'm getting at, because like I said, not only does it protect it, but it protects it from ultraviolet rays and all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Looking good, Lori. Looking good.
Yeah. It depends. Well, that boils down to what quality stain you got and to what color. So like a red like this, it will fade out a little bit. I think our daughter picked like a mid-grade. And it was how long ago? 3 years ago? 4 years ago? So roughly 3 years ago. And it's still looking pretty good. So, but it depends on how much sun it gets, what quality it was in the first place, how often you have to retreat it and stuff. Some people use more of an oil stain that actually soaks into that wood versus something that's more like a paint. I would say don't paint them, please. And I'll bring that one up as far as wood goes. If you want something that's not like a semi-transparent where you can see the grain and whatnot, and you want something that's a little more of a solid color, use a solid color stain. It will last much, much, much longer than, say, a paint or something like that. But yeah, you don't chintz out on the stain, and especially if you spend all that time doing that, it's going to make the project last and look nice longer. So, okay. I think that has to do with, so the question was, does the pretty side have to face you or your neighbor? That is something you need to take up with your local, zoning, zoning board or whatever, right? But this is why I like this too, because, so like we did this and butted up to a neighbor, and we talked to the neighbor and said, hey, all you need to do, because what they see is this. And we said, all you need to do is put another 2x4 on and buy some slats, and you can put them up, and your side will look nice too. Whereas the prefab ones like that, you can't really do that. So, yeah, that's a question you have to ask. And then you get into the whole issue of where does it need to be on the property line? So this is one of those things where before you're putting a fence up, get the surveyor out so they can, and then even when you do that, you may have a neighbor that freaks out on you. And I'm not going to get into that because I'm on film. So, yeah. And I mean, and some places are fine with you going like right on the line, and there's other places or you need to be a certain distance off the property line. And again, that's one of those things that you need to ask. Huh? Well, no, you don't need to ask permission necessarily, but I'm saying asking the where you live if there are certain regulations. You're right, the city or township or whatever. Yeah. Well, digging is the other part too. So you need to have, if you're getting ready to do that, you get all if you need a permit, fine, you get that done. If you need to find out, is there a height restriction? Is there a restriction how close it can be to the road? Well, so generally, yes, the 6 feet. And if you want one that's taller, you can ask for a variance. And you have to give, a reason why. I have a crazy neighbor or whatever. I don't know. But the other thing, too, is that some places, they say you can only run, say, like a privacy fence a certain distance from the road. And then other places are weird where they're like, yeah, it's the edge of the road that you measure out. And other places are like, no, it's the middle of the road you measure out. So these are all these little questions you need to ask, especially if you're running up close to the road. There's one right now where we live on, what is that, Millam? Yeah, Millam and West Edge or whatever. There's a wall. I'm trying to think of the name of the street, but it's a privacy fence and it runs almost all the way out to the road. And you're pulling out of a place and you can't see. You're like creeping out and you're halfway in the road because of the fence. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Right. And that's where some people use chain link that. No, and there are good reasons. So I mean, these are questions you want to ask. When you're going to be putting up a fence. Calling misdig is another one. It's the last thing you want to do is using one of those augers and find somebody's, gas line or phone line or whatever line.
I mean, I guess that's what it is. Well, I saw it on the commercial. That's why I called 811.
Yep. Yeah, and it's free. I mean, I said, Mary, they'll come out and they'll check it. So, so it's putting the fences up is not necessarily that difficult. He said it's not necessarily that time consuming, but you just have to kind of take your time and think about things.
We have a question online, Lee. Karen wants to know, how long do you have to wait to paint or stain pressure treated wood?
That's a good question. So how long do you have to wait to stain pressure treated wood? So there's a couple things with that. It used to be you had to wait for a certain amount of time because they didn't have the technology in their stains and whatnot. And they usually said, let it weather for a year or whatever. They've gotten better with that. So technically you can stain it pretty much right after you put it up. Now, I would read the stain to make sure. That's the one thing. The other is how wet is that lumber, and that can vary. It just depends. Sometimes lumber is super wet, and you may want it to dry out a little bit, just so that it soaks in a little bit better. Right. But I mean, it was relatively dry. So, I mean, that's something that we checked. I mean, technically you could buy what's called a moisture meter and be able to stab it in. And you could tell by the weight of it usually too. If you're picking up a 4x4 or something along that line and it weighs a ton, it's got a lot of water in it. So, it does depend. The other thing is, remember we were talking about that pressure treating chemical they put in? It gives that green tinge to it. Some people really don't like that because they may want a lighter stain that's going to allow you to see the wood grain and stuff. So what some people will do is they will put their fence up and they'll do all this and get it all set. And then they will use I think some companies call it like a deck brightener. But basically what it does is you apply it, you scrub it down a little bit, and it takes away that green tinge. It doesn't take away the treating, but it takes away that green tinge and blondes up that wood so that when you put a stain on, you don't have that undercoat of that green. So, talking about, details like that. And this is where you want to talk to, like I said, one of the paint stain, if you have specific questions like that around here, it's Douglas and Sons or Gales or something along that line, where they're going to be like, yep, this is good for this and this. So it depends. There's never a straight answer. And I think we're over. So
We are never over, Mr. Taylor, when you are instructing.
First time I've taught this class, I apologize.
No apologies necessary. We appreciate you and the plethora of knowledge that you have and that you always are willing to share with us. I wanted to thank everyone for joining in online and the people that participated in person. I also wanted to encourage more of you to come in. You can find us on Tuesday nights at 6 o'clock. Next Tuesday, we will be having a Ask the Expert series where we will be learning about some of Mr. Taylor's favorite hand tools as we start to get in and out of our houses. So I just wanted to thank everyone again and say good night.